I feel like the discussion of weight control, weight management, diets has been part of my life for 65 years, pretty much. It's always been in the ether. And up until very recently, and maybe to your podcast, I never heard anybody say, have a fabulous diet. It's great. It totally works. And I love it. It changed my life for good. I mean, no, nobody was ever saying anything like that. It was always positioned as a constant struggle, as a constant issue, as a constant thing. And so this idea that if you look at it all through a scientific lens and really try to understand how the body works and in its relationships with food and hunger and everything, then it demystifies it, but it also challenges you to think a little more in depth about things.
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. It's great to see you two.
Hello.
Boy, this is exciting. We've got two special guests today.
Woo-woo.
On the show this week, Fat Science is not just for people with metabolic syndrome. It's for everyone. And Andrea's guest is a longtime friend, Scott. And I think Scott, he's got a great marketing background. And he said before we hit the record button, you know, metabolism, everybody's got it. Everybody's got one.
Everyone has one. It's not just for fat people or science people.
That's right. Andrea, why don't you introduce us to Scott and take it from there?
I have known Scott. He reminded me, he did the math because I am not a math person. We've known each other since 1995, 30 years. So that makes us very old, I suppose, since we weren't 5 when we met. We actually had jobs. I worked in entertainment then. Scott still works in entertainment marketing. He is a marketing guru. And also one of my nearest and dearest friends. And he also is a fan of ours. He listens to every episode and recommends us to lots of people, which I love, and gives me nice feedback and great criticism in a good way. And I guess that's my introduction to Scott, because he's awesome.
I appreciate that introduction of me, Andrea, but I'm trying to think back on any negative criticism I've given you on this show. I'm good with negative criticism in all parts of my life and work, but I don't think I've had negative criticism. But anyway, you can remind me after the recording, because I am, as Andrea said, I'm a huge fan of the podcast. I have truly listened to every single episode, and I didn't start out thinking I was going to. I listened to your first episode as wow, my friend Andrea is participating in a podcast, and I love that, and I'm definitely going to listen and to support her. And then it's in my feed, and literally every Monday morning I listen to it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Scott, what was it? You're immersed in the world of information and ideas and marketing. What was it about the podcast that made you, I mean, I've listened to a lot of podcasts once and have, decided, that's not for me. What was it about this podcast that keeps your interest?
Well, that's a good question, and there are a lot of things. First thing I will say is that I like the trio. I like the fact that Dr. Cooper is there with the expertise and explains things very well, but that Mark and Andrea are there as the people with lived experience and people who have a really good insight into the culture and what's going on in the world. So you're bringing in all these other perspectives, and it's nice to hear you serve those things up and have Dr. Cooper respond and explain and maybe press back a little too. And so that right away works for me. That's one of the things I always enjoy listening to, how you're going to tackle another topic each week, even when it's gone into topics that I wouldn't otherwise think that would have been of interest to me. The other thing is that the more I listened to it, the more I was like recognizing how relevant it was to my life and my lifestyle, and how important it was addressing issues that matter to everyone in my family. I've grown children, how it reflects, how it impacts them, how it impacts my friends, and to some degree, how it's sort of impacted me throughout my life. And I hadn't really thought of that that clearly before. So it's been a win all around for me. I look at podcasts because I listen to all of them. Like, I listen to hundreds of them, I feel, and I listen to about maybe 15 or 20 regularly. And so they have to be time well spent. It has to be something that I'm enjoying and getting something from.
I think sometimes it's funny. Some of the topics that we've had that you thought, oh, that's not going to be such a good topic, you were like, oh, that was really, really interesting. And it didn't seem like that was going to be a good one. Do you remember any of the ones? I can't remember any of the ones that you said, ooh, that wasn't going to be good, and you thought it was good. Do you remember any of the topics that we had that were really pertinent to any people in your life, or any things that made any specific relevance with you?
I will remember that we had several conversations when I've said, oh my God, I love this episode. Like, if I was particularly enthusiastic and you said back to me, oh, we didn't really think that was going to be a big deal or whatever. There were a few of the episodes where you sort of apologize for readdressing something that you've already talked about in other episodes. And those were some of my favorite episodes, because I think to some degree, hearing about something again later on in the journey with you guys has been great, because now I know a little more and I listen on another level now. So I've never felt like any of the episodes were redundant. So that, I know I've given you that feedback.
Yeah.
There was an episode, I think, where you were focused on demystifying things, and I loved that episode. I thought that episode was just fascinating to me, and I gave you that feedback right away, and you said, oh, we were a little unsure about that. And I will say, I always love a mailbag, so anytime hearing what you're hearing from people is always good. You could do a lot of those. I love all of those.
Oh, and you liked our New Year's resolutions. I remember you said that was a really good one.
I loved that episode, and that's one I've recommended to a lot of people, because because it was so relevant and so fun, and also kind of important. It was important to hear those perspectives and hear you guys talking about it. I find as the process goes along with the podcast, I'm relating to it on a different level, and you guys are relating to each other on a different level. And I feel like, well, Andrea, I know very, very well, but I'm feeling like I know Dr. Cooper and I know Mark a little better now too.
Scott, that's really nice of you to say. One of the missions of this podcast is really to change the narrative when it comes to obesity, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. And I feel like a lot of people who write in to us say, wow, this finally makes sense. Because what we've been hearing from our own doctors, family doctors, for many, many years just didn't compute. Is that part of what resonates to you, is that it's truth in an area that is just frankly behind even what they're teaching doctors in medical school today?
I think that observation resonates deeply with me. I'm almost 65. I feel like the discussion of weight control, weight management, diets has been part of my life for 65 years, pretty much. It's always been in the ether. And up until very recently, and maybe to your podcast, I never heard anybody say, have a fabulous diet. It's great. It totally works. And I love it. It changed my life for good. I mean, no, nobody was ever saying anything like that. It was always positioned as a constant struggle, as a constant issue, as a constant thing. And so this idea that if you look at it all through a scientific lens and really try to understand how the body works and in its relationships with food and hunger and everything, then it demystifies it, but it also challenges you to think a little more in depth about things. A lot of people in my family are in the automotive world, and my brother's in automotive repair. And he always laughs when somebody says, oh, there's a problem with my engine. Can you fix it? And he's like, I have to diagnose what's wrong with all the systems that are in your engine and everything that things. And he will spend 2 days building and rebuilding a transmission just for fun. But that's how complicated the engine is. And the metabolism's a little bit like an engine. I would always talk about it, oh, my metabolism's great, or there's something wrong with my metabolism, as if it's just this little engine and not a whole interlocking system and,
Right.
and everything. And through this discussion that you guys do in the podcast, I'm realizing, oh my God, this is like a whole system of things and not just a thing.
That's great. Well, let's bring in our other listener. Heidi and I have been friends for a few years now, and Heidi took to the podcast very early. Heidi, it's great to have you here. You told me early on, I absolutely love fat science. You guys are just talking about such interesting things. Take me back, Heidi, to when you first discovered the podcast, and what was it about fat science that resonated with you? And by the way, you're one of the most fit people I know, and I don't think you struggle at all with metabolic syndrome, but you still found it interesting.
So I do, though. That's the crazy thing. And obesity runs in my family. And we won't go into my beautiful background of all my health issues, but yeah, lots of hormone issues and just a whole slew of problems. And Andrea, your story is my story. And, my oldest daughter is morbidly obese and my son was following in those footsteps. You would be mortified, Dr. Cooper, to learn that at 12 years old, his primary care physician recommended an Altoid diet.
Oh boy. Oh my
Right.
goodness.
Yeah, this was 2 years ago. So this is not like 20 years ago. It's 2 years ago. My son's like, Mom, I'll try that. I said, oh, honey.
What is that?
Yeah, to eat Altoids before food so it won't taste good.
Oh,
Yeah, I can't
2
make-
years ago?
That does not justify being called an Altoid diet. That's crazy.
I can't make it up because he has 3 daughters who are thin, and that's how they maintain their weight. And so,
The
so why
doctor?
did I
The doctor?
gravitate? Yeah.
oh,
So why did I gravitate towards this? Because I feel like you speak about real issues in a real language that people can understand, and apply to their life. You completely changed the way I think about food. I was very restricting. Andrea, my story is your story. I don't have to go over your story. You name it, I've done it, right? And I learned that, yes, we all have a metabolism, but it all starts here.
right.
Yes,
And
it's
that
really different.
So hard for me to grasp.
It's not your
Here
stomach,
as
it's
in,
your
in the brain.
It's here.
It's so different.
And it was so hard to not restrict myself. And it was so freeing. And, my son and I have been working with a personal trainer for 2 years. And guess what I don't do anymore, Dr. Cooper? If I can't fuel it, I don't do it.
Yay, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And you've just taught me so many valuable lessons that, my son was 12, so 12, 15, and 17 were my kids when I was introduced to you guys, roughly. And so I'm able to undo some of the damage that I'd already done unintentionally. But everything from fueling my daughter, who's an extreme athlete, just the little tips and tricks, a Gatorade at halftime, or, it's okay to have a Fig Newton bar. Just
Those are good.
The little things that you pass off in your podcast are just easy to implement and common sense. I just feel like you're bringing common sense back.
Wow, that's wonderful. I'm so glad that this message is resonating with people like you who really needed this for your family's health, and it's amazing.
I never heard of the Altoid diet. I probably would have done that, though.
You would have.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I've tried it. I have Altoids next to my bed so that I don't eat at night. It doesn't
no.
work. But the fact that I was witnessing firsthand my son being given this information.
And you want to take it back. You want to cover his ears and go back in time to before that comment was made.
I just had to choose a different path with him, and just say, honey, you either make a choice to make some different decisions about what we're putting into our body and what we do, right? Physically, right? Because he was starting to make some different decisions around video games and things like that. Or we love our body for where it's at.
Yeah.
And
Now I have a challenge for you.
yeah.
What if he does decide to make those healthy choices with eating really healthy, nutritious food and being active, and it doesn't change the
doesn't
situation?
change.
Then what?
So kind of two different scenarios. He did make those changes, and he joined Boy Scouts. He got really active. His body changed. My oldest daughter didn't, and she went further into the morbidly obese. And that's her choice. Like, she has those choices, and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm concerned for her, but there's nothing I can do.
Well, I've got to push back more. Well, the reason is we're wanting to make sure people understand that things that affect our body size, that weight, or even our appetite, they really are coming from a deeper underlying problem. So those are more like symptoms. And there are some choices you can make for sure to make your lifestyle healthier and all that. But if there's so much of this rampant in your genetics from what you're describing, there's most likely an underlying pathophysiologic reason that this is happening. And so the concern would be boys' growth spurt is age 11 to 17. And you know how easy it is, how it's a slippery slope of you make your lifestyle healthier, you take it a notch further, you may become on that disordered spectrum where now a lot of your mind is occupied on this, this kind of sense of what I eat, how I exercise, and that's managing my quote weight. So that's one thing to keep an eye on with your son to make sure, because it's very, very common in young boys to go down that pathway, and it can inhibit their development if it's in that growth spurt. So that's something to just keep an eye out for, because as we always have said, and quote, diets work, but not really. I mean, short term, you can force your body to do anything. It's what happens in the long term, and there is something called diet backlash that can happen that can amplify the original metabolic problems. So that's something about I'm not saying that it won't balance out, because also he's at that age where sometimes the testosterone kicks in a little bit, and that really helps too with metabolic function. So maybe that will help. And then with your daughter being, in the situation she is, it's not really a choice that she has to make. That's the thing. I don't really think it is. I think it's more like find out what's wrong. Find out what is causing this, and not looking at what she's doing, like she's eating this or she's tired and so she's not active or something, as being the cause. Maybe they're just symptoms. So find out what's driving it in the underlying area, because otherwise it's putting it on her like it is her choice when it's really not, probably. It's probably more a medical issue, medical problem that she's going to have to address. And maybe as part of that, there'll be lifestyle recommendations, but that will be a piece of a bigger kind of evaluation and treatment strategy.
Okay. And like when she had all of her labs done, it's really interesting because everything comes back okay. Like she doesn't have fatty liver disease, and she doesn't have, she's had lots of panels done. Every 6 months they'll do panels.
Well, and that's what you want to look at, like what are on those panels. So,
Okay.
and as we always say, you can be really healthy at any weight, you can be very unhealthy at any weight too. So she may have great cholesterol, blood pressure, no sign of fatty liver, maybe normal glucose, maybe all of those health parameters may be normal. It still doesn't mean that she doesn't have a metabolic root cause of the high body weight problem and the low energy. So it could still be something that's driving that. And so it's hard to tell without knowing like the labs that she did, how comprehensive they were. But in our clinic, someone like that, we would do, all the hormones, including the reproductive hormones, the testosterone levels, the insulin levels, the fasting and the after eating ones, then hormones from your body fat that try to say what your weight is to see if it's in line with where it's supposed to be. And also neurotransmitter levels that say we're starving, we're in a famine. So we get a lot deeper, evaluations. I'm not saying she has to have like that huge comprehensive evaluation to get treatment, but I would look at what's really going on in her case. And because it runs in your family, you have something going on. Didn't you say a parent had something? And now your kids, these are genetic problems. This is like Andrea told me, this is like the cards you're dealt.
Yeah.
It's not.
When I weighed like weigh over 350 pounds. My body thought that I weighed like 89 pounds or
Yeah,
something, and it wouldn't
yes.
let go of any fat for me to lose any weight. And I wasn't eating a ton of food. So
Yeah,
it was still,
Andrea's labs were the same in certain areas as someone with anorexia nervosa that was 40 pounds underweight.
yeah. So, and I mean, they're still not, they still don't read like somebody who's, you know, a chubster.
But I'm just saying that there is help.
But I mean, really, it's like that blood thing. When my blood was saying, "Oh my God, you're like an anorexia person," I'm like, "Hello, look in the mirror. Can't my blood look in the mirror? I mean, come on, look at me."
Right.
So
But
what
It
yeah,
is
was really interesting. That was a really interesting test. I was like,
Yeah.
I was totally freaked out by that one.
So what is the doctor? So she's currently in Arizona. So if she was looking, because at this point now she's 19. So if she wanted, the ball is in her court, if she wanted to look into this, what type of a doctor would she look for, and
think-
what
yeah.
would she ask for?
That's a great question. I think, first off, look for someone with board certification in obesity medicine because they're more likely to look for those deeper indicators and also to have knowledge of treatment strategies that could be implemented. But the most important thing to do is tell her it's not your fault. Like, I get that maybe you could have a healthier lifestyle, but that's not the reason this is happening to you. That you have to also convey that to her and tell her because she probably feels terrible.
It's the truth. She's always sat there and said, "Why is it that our middle child Frankie eats the exact same thing as me,
Yes.
and I'm my size?" And I
Right.
just and I
Yeah.
yeah,
Because it sucks.
it totally sucks. It totally sucks. It absolutely does. And the beauty is with my son, his definition of his healthy diet, it is his own choice with his healthy lifestyle and his diet, but it means vegetables and fruits. And that is his idea of healthy. And he tries to get a variety of 15 to 20. And that is his goal. And I think that's a great goal, right? So it's very loosely held in our house and it's up to his standard. And I think that that's a wonderful start for a 14-year-old.
Well, it is if it's not part of the, slippery slope to that disordered behavior. Because if you're spending time eating 15 servings of whatever produce, are you really getting all the other stuff, or is that just filling up your stomach and you're not getting enough calories, protein? So you got to watch out about like your family, the messaging in there, and the anxiety, in the family around this area, because you want to make sure that while nutrition and exercise are such important components of everyone's health, Scott's health, your health, Mark's health, my health, even our dog's health. But those are very important components of our health, but they don't have the power to reverse metabolic dysfunction long term. They do not. And in fact, it can make it a lot worse if you're turning to those as your only tool to try to change things, and you're focusing on that number on the scale and trying to change it by changing your energy in, energy out. That can lead to a lifetime of problems. I mean, just ask Andrea. And yourself, from what you described, these things. And so, I mean, that's one thing. I'd just be cautious and not compliment your son for eating all those vegetables and stuff. I mean, because who knows what he's really thinking and what the emotional piece of that is. And you don't want to be reinforcing something that may not be coming from a place of, security. And so this is really hard stuff. Getting into
It is really hard
stuff here.
He needs the fiber, and we'll leave it at that. So
Yeah.
he does have to eat a certain amount of bulkage. We'll leave it at that. But we don't have scales in our house anymore, Dr.
That's
Goldberg.
good.
Wow. That's
That's a
fantastic.
great
We don't
step.
do that scale thing anymore.
That's great.
You know what's interesting, though, is this stuff is so deeply rooted. My mother, who's 85 years old, still lives up on the farm. We were talking the other day, and she said, "Oh, I made some pizza tonight, and it was a crustless pizza." She said the crust was made out of cream cheese and something else. And I was like,
Cream cheese?
right. I'm thinking, okay, cream cheese is
Okay.
almost all fat. But I was like, "Mom, why are you doing this?" "Well, I just thought it would be healthier." I said, "Mom, carbs are not the enemy. Don't you listen to Fat Science.
No.
But I mean, all of us, Dr. Cooper, and one thing that I can tell you about Heidi is she's one of the most intentional parents that I know in terms of trying to impart knowledge to her kids that will make their lives better. But again, we have to examine what are we teaching our kids, but even our parents, in their 80s have this misconception that carbs are somehow bad. And
Right.
that's what this podcast is all about, is to just deconstruct the myth. And what you touched on, Dr. Cooper, and we've talked about this, Andrea, is the mental freedom is probably the most profound thing that happens when you treat metabolic syndrome. It's really unbelievable to not have to worry about what we're eating.
Well, Scott has a household of women. What do you hear in your house?
So I was going to just weigh in that when I grew up in, there was my mom, but then there's three boys and my dad. And my mother grew up as a relatively thin person, and so did my dad. Literally, we never talked about any of this in my household growing up. There were bowls of candy out all over the place, always filled, and we would all gladly, there was no scarcity about that. No, they literally, my friends would laugh. They were like, your parents are like, they leave junk food everywhere. I was like, yeah, it's always there. We don't, it's nothing special. And so literally, I don't recall any discussion growing up about what's a healthy food, what's a not healthy food. And we, in retrospect, we ate pretty unhealthy. I mean, every Friday night was pizza. Every Saturday night was like going to McDonald's or Burger King or something, because that was just what everybody wanted. And I was the only one in the family actually who had a weight problem because I was overweight as a child. And I just ate volumes and volumes and volumes of food. And because I liked everything. Anyway, flash forward to now, and I'm very comfortable with my weight, and I'm a thin guy now, and I exercise a lot, and I naturally like to eat healthy. I like to cook. I like to do all sorts of stuff like that. But I'm in a household of women, and there is a lot more, there had been, especially as the girls were growing up, a lot more discussion about these things and a lot more focus on this. And my wife, who's pretty up on top of nutritional things, would never want to characterize any food as a bad food or a thing as a bad thing. But I think our only way through this was to cook, was to prepare our food ourselves. And that is, so I mean, with Heidi's son, I think, the range of vegetables sounds kind of interesting to me. I hope he can prepare them well, like in stir fries and soups and things like that I happen to love to eat that way, and it's fun to cook that way, and it might be healthy too if we want to characterize things like that. But participating in the creation of the food that you're excited to eat, I think is great. And that would be the main thing I got out of this whole journey, that, my personal journey on this.
As we're just about at time now, I'd love to give both Heidi and Scott a chance to ask Dr. Cooper anything that they've had a burning desire to ask, because, in a podcast, you feel like shouting out, well, what about this? What about that? Heidi, do you have anything you want to put to Dr. Cooper?
Such a fangirl. Okay, I do have one. Okay, saunas. I'm not going to name any names of these places that pop up in your neighborhood strip malls that guarantee will burn 987 calories in 30 minutes if you just come in and just do this HIIT workout. Okay. But we do have a sauna at our lake house. I am just going to ask you kind of a 2 or 3 fold question about being in saunas, either infrared or whatever. What are your thoughts on them and your metabolism? Working out in them? Do you really burn 987 calories in 30 minutes?
Oh, you can melt it away?
I don't know.
No, they don't really change your metabolism, saunas.
neat.
But one thing that they actually do, how they talk about like gets rid of toxins. It actually does reduce some of our accumulated toxins that are at least in our like skin area and things like that. And so, but it's a small reduction, but they do that. But I definitely wouldn't recommend exercising in them because it can be really dangerous. And, obviously they're hot, you're going to potentially get dehydrated. Some people have underlying cardiac issues that they're not aware of. And then once they get dehydrated, a lot of stuff can happen. Or if you have a thyroid problem, temperature regulation can be an issue. So
I thought I was going to have a heart attack during a hot yoga class one time.
Yeah, I was going
And
to
the instructor looked at me and said, you can take a break if you want.
Well, it's not something to joke about. You know what? I had a patient who did have a heart attack during a hot yoga class.
Because it's really, really strenuous.
Had to call 911. Yeah, they can be, it's because it throws your body. And this patient that I had that had a heart attack didn't really have coronary artery disease even. So it was one of those episodes of like a spasm in the coronary arteries. So it's never good to exercise in heat unless you're acclimated. So some athletes that are going to be competing at, in a hot environment, they take time to acclimate to that environment. So it changes their sweat rate and their cooling mechanisms kick in. But if you just intermittently go and try to do that, you won't have those cooling mechanisms functional. But it doesn't improve your metabolism.
Okay, but using the sauna a few times a week just to detox and for stress is healthy. Okay.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I think people get a lot out of it as long as you're sure it's like a safe environment for you and you're hydrated, and make sure you tell someone where you are. Just
Bring your phone in there.
Yeah, just in case. You never know.
We watch TV in ours together. So
there you go. Yeah, don't do it alone.
I love it. I love it. Scott, do you have a question for Dr. Cooper?
Yeah, I do have one, but first I'll say that I loved Heidi's question about the sauna because I am a sauna guy. I really do like heat, and so I will go all the time. I never thought it would like burn calories. I always thought, I know I need to hydrate. It's getting rid of a lot of liquid, and I think that science has sort of reinforced some of that too when you've talked about diets and how they impact your retention of water and stuff. So. And the other thing I'll tell you, Mark, is like I'm a yoga guy. I take a yoga class almost every single day because now that I'm sort of retired, a little more than less. So I'm taking a yoga class every day, but not, I would like a hot yoga class maybe twice a week. Everything else is a room temperature and I love it and it's great for me. But here's my question, Dr. Cooper. You don't speak that much on the podcast about the relationship of metabolism and sleep. And sleep is a thing. I'm sensing this in the air from all of my friends and everything. Is like trying to figure out how to be healthier sleepers.
Yeah.
And so what's your thinking on that, guidance on that, about how we should approach sleep?
And we have focused on it a bit in the podcast, but it's true. It's a huge player in metabolism. So some of the main points that stand out are quality of sleep. And so that quality of sleep, you always have to make sure there's no sleep apnea that's interfering with the sleep quality or oxygenation during the night, because that has a profound impact, negative impact on metabolism if it's present. But in general, the quality, the duration, and even the time of where your sleep cycle is. So when you fall asleep and when you wake up can make a difference too, because the metabolic hormones balance while we're asleep to a large extent. And so I see it as kind of a cycle where first our famine hormone ghrelin, starts to rise in the evening, and it kind of peaks around midnight. And that would be telling our brain how hungry our body is. So it may not make you hungry, although it could. Some people do describe feeling hungry like from 5 p.m. to midnight in sync with this ghrelin rise. But it tells your brain that your body's hungry. And so if you're not asleep by midnight, it just keeps going up. So we always try to get our patients to fall asleep well before midnight, which is not easy for young people and night owls. It's just, we try. But, and then as you're sleeping, you actually have to enter that deep sleep stage in order to have healthy metabolic hormone response. And so one way to tell if you've been in that deep sleep is sometimes if you've been in the REM sleep where you dream. So if you have vivid dreams, you really can't get into that without having gone through that deep stage. So dreaming a lot is a good sign, actually. But in any case, then as the night goes on, between 2 and 4 a.m., the reassuring signal, leptin, the hormone from the body fat, starts to rise and present a different argument saying, oh, we're secure, we're not starving. And so the balance of those two signals essentially sets our metabolic rate for like the next morning when we wake up. So our brain, so if our ghrelin is too high because we went to bed too late, or our leptin never rose because we're getting interrupted sleep from 2 to 4 a.m., then in the morning, our body's going to set that metabolic rate in a conservation mode, slow it down a little, because it's under the impression that we must be starving. We must not have enough food. It's not getting those reassuring signals. And then what some people do is they just jump out and start doing a workout. And so then the effect of that, without having breakfast or anything fueling, the effect of that would be to further slow down that base metabolic rate for that day. And then your next chance to prove otherwise would be that night, that next night, your cycle, and what does it convey to the brain.
So Heidi and I both nodded vigorously. You said that. And I will say that one of my changed behaviors from listening to Fat Science has been, because I'm a early morning workout person, is I will always have like a cup of yogurt or cup of cottage cheese or just something. I'm not hungry for it, but I just am like, okay, I need this fuel. And so that is definitely a changed behavior for me. But the moment you said it, both Heidi and I went, yes. Sir.
I don't work out in the morning anymore, Dr. Cooper. Because of you, I work out at 3 p.m.
Good.
I fuel all day long.
Yay.
And you literally just might have solved my night eating syndrome with what I just wrote down about that. And it blows my mind that my primary care does not understand the whole thing.
I feel like we could talk for hours. Heidi and Scott, it's so great to have you here and to get to know a little bit more about you guys. And we love the fact that you love the show. So you have a standing invitation to give us feedback anytime, and keep in touch.
Thank you for
Thanks for
listening.
coming.
Thank you for inviting us. It was such a treat. When Andrea texted me, like, do you want to be on Fat Science next week? I think she was shocked at how fast I wrote back.
I know. I showed everybody. I did it while we were talking, and I was like, "Look, he said yes. Look, he said yes."
With like 5 exclamation points. So,
Yeah, I was equally as eager, Scott.
That is awesome. This has been another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.